Good evening. It was a scene right out of an action-packed Hollywood movie. Bloody gun battles between cops and robbers on the streets of suburban Los Angeles today.
He must have fired over 500 rounds. Unbelievable. It was like a war zone, and he just kept doing it, and the cops were all pinned down. One of them was bleeding pretty bad.
Guys walked in, they looked like they were RoboCop. They were so heavily armed, and they looked dangerous.
The one weapon that we've identified can go through a bulletproof vest at 200 yards.
These are very organized, brutal bank robbery suspects. They're killers.
The North Hollywood Shootout. It is the story of a bank robbery that went very, very wrong. A surrealist holdup worthy of a movie scene, or should I say, worthy of an open-world video game. What happened in Los Angeles on the morning of February 28, 1997, was actually real. That day, two stout and heavily armed men decided to carry out an extremely brutal robbery, a completely botched theft that would soon turn into a huge shooting. Two robbers against almost 400 policemen, including SWAT members, all in the middle of Los Angeles and broadcasted live on television. With an impressive arsenal of illegally modified guns, the two robbers will indeed shoot anything that moves to try to get away from the crime scene. Civilians or policemen, nobody is safe from the armor-piercing bullets coming from everywhere. Some of their war weapons shoot 10 bullets per second, a simply staggering and insane firepower for a bank robbery. On the other side, the police, having only handguns and shotguns with a weak range to compete with, try to keep the bandits at bay. But the bullets they shoot only tickle them, because, adding to their war weapons, the robbers also are equipped with bulletproof protection from head to toe. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu are the two who were behind this insane robbery. Two guys keen on guns and bodybuilding who met at the gym in 1989 to then form a friendship rooted in hatred of society. Two determined robbers who didn't seem to be afraid of death, and who, during almost an hour, spread a climate of terror in Los Angeles. We still don't know whether they came to rob a bank or make war. What is sure, they committed one of the most brutal robberies in history. So brutal that it is known today under the name of the North Hollywood Shootout. Thinking back to bank robberies in the USA, we think of the 1930s and the era of the John Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Bonnie and Clyde. A period in American history where armed robbery was flourishing. The Great Depression struck the U.S. hard, creating an atmosphere of economic distress that led more and more people to turn to robbery. As a result, the number of bank robberies increased dramatically, to the point where some people refer to these years as the golden age of bank robbery. But fortunately, this trend was put on hold after a while, and the following decades were, shall we say, rather quiet in terms of armed robbery. The authorities had managed to put a stop to this incredible rise in crime, and we thought it was all a thing of the past. But not at all, since bank robberies would make a resurgence from the 1960s onwards, more precisely between 1965 and 1975, when armed robberies climbed from 850 to almost 3,500 per year. A spectacular rise, you may say, but it didn't stop there. Yes, because the trend continued into the 70s and 80s, with 5,500 robberies in 1985 alone. The curve then kept climbing, reaching even more insane figures in the following decade, with almost 7,900 robberies in 1990 and 9,388 the year after. A real epidemic of armed robbery, with its epicenter in the far west of the United States, Los Angeles, the city that has become known as the national capital of bank robbery. An unenviable title, we may say. When it comes to attracting tourists, we've seen better. But believe me, the City of Angels deserved this distinction. In fact, you only have to look at crime rates at the time to understand. Remember when I told you that 1991 recorded over 9,300 robberies? Well, a quarter of that staggering figure came from Los Angeles County alone. Yep, 2,355 robberies in that single year. Worse, it's not even the highest total the city has ever recorded, because we still have 1992, when the peak was reached this time, with 2,641 armed robberies. That's roughly 7 bank robberies a day, or 1 every working hour. Just imagine. Moreover, there were so many of them in the 80s and 90s that Hollywood took an interest in the phenomenon, producing some of the greatest bank robbery films set in Southern California. Point Break, actually, released in 1991, and above all, the benchmark in bank robbery films, released in 1995, Heat. At the time, Los Angeles was suffering from an ever-increasing number of robberies. If the rates were alarming, what was even more so was the brutal violence with which gangsters operated during these armed robberies. Most of them were equipped as if they were going to war. Machine guns, assault rifles, bulletproof vests. It seemed that with this new wave of robbers, the end justified the means, and nothing could stop them from stealing the loot they had set their sights on. So much so, in fact, that some thought that if they had to kill, they would. What turned bank robberies into recurrently violent operations in Los Angeles was that famous robbery on September 5th, 1991. On this particular day, 2 men, members of a bank robbery gang well known to the police as the West Hills Bandits, enter a Wells Fargo branch in the Tarzana district of Los Angeles. Heavily armed and wearing masks, they paradoxically demonstrate a disconcerting civility when it comes to robbery. They gather customers and employees together, telling them quite naturally,
"Enjoy the show."
In less than 2 minutes, the establishment is robbed. True professionals, there was no doubt about it, and courteous too, since as they left the premises, they gave the hostages a cheerful,
"Thanks, everyone."
The 2 robbers left thrilled, with quite a haul in their pockets. $437,000, a record loot for the Los Angeles jurisdiction at the time, which would, alas, be mistakenly revealed to the general public by a bank employee, because it was from that moment on that things really took a turn for the worse. For among those tipped off were some of the city's criminals, who were already licking their chops when they heard how much had been stolen. They now had proof that it was possible to make large sums of money by robbing banks in Los Angeles. Such was the case with Robert Sheldon Brown, aka Casper, a prominent member of the Crips gang, who figured that robberies might indeed be a good business idea. Within weeks, he sent dozens of armed teenage gangs to rob the city's banks. These kids, often as young as 13, would wreak havoc on any bank they passed. Unlike the West Hills Bandits, who were polite and meticulous, these kids were nervous, undisciplined, and above all, extremely violent. The baby bandits, as the FBI came to call them, would appear in the banks firing bursts of bullets at the ceiling, when it wasn't at themselves or their accomplices. When they attacked, no one was spared. Sometimes tellers were needlessly beaten with rifle butts, or hostage customers had their wedding rings brutally ripped from their fingers by the baby bandits. So of course, their amateurism disserved them, to the point where they were captured in droves by the authorities. But the more they were captured, the more Casper sent new ones. Teenage gangsters were a common sight, and Casper was never short-staffed. So, thanks to his army of baby bandits, he was able to commit over 175 robberies, more than any other person in U.S. history, and not take part in any of them. If Los Angeles earned the title of bank robbery capital in the 90s, you can be sure it was largely due to him, just like the sudden rise in violence committed during these same holdups at the time. And even though Robert Sheldon Brown would later be arrested, others would follow in his footsteps. Like these 2 young men, who had no doubt watched too much Heat, and who in turn tried their hand at bank robbery with equally extreme and gratuitous violence. 2 guys who were none other than Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu, the perpetrators of the North Hollywood Shootout. We're in the mid-90s, and the heyday of armed robbery seems to be over. The number of robberies in Los Angeles is drastically dropping from 2,641 during the peak of 1992 to 749 the following year. The main reason? The leader of the Baby Bandits was under arrest in 1993. This arrest gave the LA police a breath, at least until 1996, when another group of robbers appeared. The duo we're interested in, featuring Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu. But let's take a step back in time to get an understanding of who these two men were. Larry Phillips Jr., of Mexican and Italian descent, was born on September the 20th, 1970, in Los Angeles, into a family not like any other. His father, Larry Phillips Sr., had several run-ins with the law during his life, which didn't make his son's childhood any easier. It is said that it was his father who encouraged Larry Phillips Jr. to take the road of delinquency by projecting onto him his hatred of police officers. According to Larry Phillips Sr., this hatred began on his son's 6th birthday, when FBI agents came to his house, guns drawn, to arrest him. He said,
Larry hated cops because of what they did to me. He knew that every time I came into contact with police, something bad happened.
Another version says that the father would also have influenced his son during mountain trips, which would have created in Larry an aversion to law enforcement, a hatred that would follow him all his life. Later, his parents divorced, and Larry lived with his mother, even though his father continues to see him and plays a role in his life, taking him to try his hand at firearms at shooting ranges. These sessions instilled in the young man a real passion for weapons. At 13, he dropped out of school. Yes, because what interests Larry most is money. He wants to get rich quick, and he's determined to do it by following in the footsteps of his idols, some of whom were big names in white-collar crime. According to Larry's half-brother, he was motivated by nothing more than money and power.
Larry wanted to live the American dream, but he decided to go about it the wrong way. He idolized the wrong people.
Then came the inevitable. On September 2, 1989, Larry committed his first crime, a theft of $400 worth of suits, for which he was arrested and tried, and which brought him a 3-day stay at the police station. As the months went on, he found himself in legal trouble again, this time because of illegal real estate activities, fraud to be precise, a crime for which he will be sentenced again. But Larry doesn't seem to learn his lesson and keeps on persevering. His thirst for wealth, coupled with the resentment of society's rules, only grows. Sometimes he would take his half-brother to the richest parties of the city to motivate him, as he put it. In particular, he would tell him,
Why don't you visualize yourself in that house? The reason is, society tells you you have to do a 9-to-5 job until you retire at 65.
Wealth is what drove Larry Phillips Jr. A bit like bodybuilding, another of his passions that he practiced diligently and which led him to meet the second protagonist of the North Hollywood Shootout, Emil Matasareanu. Gold's Gym in Venice Beach is where Larry and Emil first met. Larry, a bodybuilding enthusiast, has been dreaming of becoming the new Arnold Schwarzenegger since he was a teenager. So he puts his heart and soul into it, reading a plethora of books on the subject and training regularly. Unfortunately, not everyone can become a bodybuilding star. Genetics playing a large part, Larry realizes that his dream will remain forever out of reach and puts an end to his ambition to become Mr. Olympia. This disillusionment doesn't prevent him from remaining disciplined in his training. However, Larry continues to attend Gold's Gym until the day he meets another regular who is also passionate about bodybuilding and firearms. Emil Matasareanu, of Romanian origin, was born in Timișoara, Romania, on July 19, 1966. He was the only son of parents who decided to leave Europe in the mid-1970s and settle in the United States in Los Angeles. Like Larry, Emil had a difficult childhood, but for different reasons. His classmates regularly mocked him for his Romanian accent and for being overweight. This constant harassment prompted him to spend much of his time at home in front of his computer. During this period, he developed a passion for firearms. He managed to make a few friends, but never kept them for very long. He was a socially maladjusted young man, as his mother describes him. At home, tensions flare as Emil's parents begin to argue more and more. Divorce was around the corner, but Emil seemed to be coping with the situation for the time being. He continued his studies, taking a 3-year course in electronic engineering, graduating in 1987. Sometime later, he opened his own IT business. His mother wanted him to continue his studies, but he was determined to enter the business world and start earning money. His parents' recurring quarrels and pressure he was under gradually weighed on him, leading to a series of temper tantrums, such as the time he threw a chainsaw in his neighbor's face because his dog had dared to walk on their lawn. Computers and guns are no longer enough to relieve Emil's stress, and neighbors often see him on the front porch cleaning his guns. The need to channel his anger leads him to another passion, which initially causes him to lose over 100 pounds, but also leads him to meet his future partner in crime, Larry. The story takes place in 1989 at Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, Los Angeles. Emil, who trains there regularly, meets a man who will dramatically change his life. A young man who, like him, enjoys lifting weights and guns, who will soon embark with him on a frenzied crime spree. Yes, because it's Larry who's clearly going to emerge as the leader in this new friendship, to the point where he manipulates Emil psychologically, because according to Larry's half-brother, Emil was just a follower in the group.
You can't imagine how manipulative my brother was. He tried to break your mind down and then build it up again so that you would become one of his crew.
This is how Larry controlled every aspect of Emil Mătăsăreanu's life. He most likely told him about his resentment towards the police and society, and even went so far as to influence his choice of spouse. Emil had indeed returned to Romania in the early 1990s to bring his grandmother to the United States. He then used the opportunity to bring back a Romanian woman, whom he later married. Larry, for his part, was with a Hispanic woman. So it was this friendship that triggered the events that unfolded in North Hollywood on February 28, 1997. An ordinary friendship, but one that would soon turn into a murderous agreement. Los Angeles was clearly not ready for what was to come. October 23, 1993, Glendale, Los Angeles County. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Mătăsăreanu, driving a red Ford Thunderbird, leave a gas station at high speed. Just then, Ian Grimes, a nearby police sergeant, spots them and immediately gives chase. Having succeeded in stopping them, the officer then asks them a few routine control questions. Faced with the officer's questions, Larry seems reluctant to answer. Worse, Emil lies to the officer, saying that the car belongs to Larry's mother, even though they had rented it at an airport. Emil should have known that before arresting them, the policeman would have asked for a license plate check, which of course he later did. Faced with Larry's hesitation and his friend's attempt at deception, Officer Grimes senses that something is fishy. So he invites Larry to get out of the car and join him in the back to check him out. And what does he find? A gun. The agent's suspicion grows and grows. He immediately calls for reinforcements, and when they open the trunk, surprise, he and his colleagues discover a whole arsenal of weapons, including assault rifles, machine guns, explosive devices, bulletproof vests, smoke bombs, enough to leave the police speechless. Had Larry and Emil been speeding to a safe house to hide all this equipment? It's possible. What's certain is that they couldn't have gone far now that the officers had arrested them. Larry and Emil were identified by the police and sentenced to prison for conspiracy to commit robbery, for which they each spent about 100 days in jail. They serve their respective sentences, then are released onto the streets of Los Angeles with a large part of their arsenal in their possession. Of course, they don't learn their lesson and get ready to commit their first robbery. Their first armed robbery was a van holdup that took place in broad daylight on June 14, 1995, in the Winnetka district of Los Angeles. It was 12:25 a.m. when the two men, wearing hoods and carrying assault rifles, held up a Brinks armored car. Inside were two security guards, including Herman Cook, a 51-year-old father of two.
"Get down! Don't look!"
orders one of the bandits to the pedestrians before taking action. The extremely brutal robbery began with a barrage of shots fired without warning at the armored car, in full view of a dozen witnesses. The bandits didn't even give the security guards a chance to hand over the money, simply opening fire on them without warning. Using their automatic assault rifles with armor-piercing bullets, they gave Herman Cook no chance, and he died under fire, shot at point-blank range. $122,500 was the loot that Larry Phillips and Emil Matasareanu had taken that day, at the cost of a man's life. Even the reward offered for their capture would prove greater than the amount they stole that day. March 27, 1996, 9 months later. Larry and Emil attack another armored car with an equally direct and brutal modus operandi. They were in a van when one of them, on the passenger side, shot through the windshield of a Brinks van coming towards them in the opposite direction. One of the agents inside is slightly wounded by shards of glass, but this is not enough to stop the vehicle carrying the money, as it speeds off to escape the assailants. Larry and Emil turn back to try and catch up with it, but are unable to do so. It's their first big failure. To erase the evidence, they set fire to their van before changing vehicles and fleeing. The scene is eerily reminiscent of the film Heat, released a month earlier. May 2nd, 1996. The duo followed up with another armed robbery. Gone were the armored vans. Now they decided to take the plunge and hit the banks. Their first target? A Bank of America branch in the Van Nuys district of Los Angeles. It was shortly before 10 o'clock a.m. when the two robbers, armed with automatic rifles, burst into the establishment and fired a dozen shots into the ceiling. Inside, some 30 people were taken hostage, including several children, terrified by what was happening. Some of them were crying, which soon irritated the two men, who threatened to kill them if their mothers didn't make them stop crying. Larry and Emil have absolutely no scruples. All they care about is money, and that day, they're going to get a lot of it, over $755,000. Then, on May 31st, 1996, it's the same old story. Larry and Emil attacked a second Bank of America branch, not far from where they robbed the armored car that had claimed Herman Cook's life a year before. The robbery began at 10:05 a.m. with the same modus operandi as earlier in the month. This time, however, they left two injured tellers in their wake. The amount stolen was even greater than the previous one, almost $800,000. Giving them a total of almost $1.5 million in the space of 30 days. The investigators had been warned. For the first time, they could see the two robbers they were looking for through the surveillance cameras. Two hooded robbers with imposing, intimidating builds, walking slowly, assault rifles in hand. An atypical bank robber profile, and what especially jumps out at the FBI agents is the time taken by the duo to pull off the two robberies. 6 minutes for the first and 8 for the second, which is an eternity for bank robberies. In fact, it's as if they don't seem to be in any hurry when it comes to robbing. always keeping the same pace, even during the getaway. As if, in the end, it wasn't robbery itself that animated them, but the possible armed confrontation with the authorities. Maybe that was what they wanted to do, after all. Well, if it was, they were in for a treat. Yeah, because we finally arrived at the holdup we're interested in. The one that will soon pit Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu against an armada of police officers in the middle of Los Angeles. The North Hollywood Shootout was just around the corner. February 28, 1997, Los Angeles. That morning, in the City of Angels, the weather was mild and clement. The blue sky over the city suggests a pleasant, sunny day. Just another winter's morning, you might say, for the residents of North Hollywood, who have no idea that their neighborhood will soon be the scene of one of the most violent urban shootouts in history. On Laurel Canyon Boulevard, two men in a white Chevrolet with heavily tinted windows speed down the road towards a bank in the North Hollywood neighborhood. Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu are ready for their next big heist. With them is an impressive arsenal, including several illegally modified weapons of war. Their tactical vests are overflowing with ammunition clips. Larry is carrying almost 20 kilograms of gear, including homemade bulletproof protection, which covers him from head to toe. Emil, more lightly equipped, takes only a metal ballistic plate to protect his vital organs. Sometime earlier, they had swallowed tranquilizers to reduce the stress of going into action. 9:11 a.m., the duo gradually approached their target, a Bank of America branch in North Hollywood. The car parks, but surprisingly, the robbers position it facing the wall. A curious strategy, given that parking in reverse would have enabled them to escape more quickly. No matter, the robbery is about to begin. Larry and Emil put on their hoods and sunglasses. Larry does a quick check on the police scanner, which he illegally possesses, and then it's off. It's 9:17 a.m. when the two men exit the vehicle, one after the other. Their watches are set to 8 minutes, the time they estimate before the police intervene. They head for the bank entrance. Their bodybuilder stature combined with the heavy equipment they're wearing make them look like two intimidating monsters about to terrify the world.
Okay, motherfucker, let's go.
The robbery begins when Larry orders one of the bank's customers to enter the establishment. Two policemen standing near the bank witness the surreal scene.
5840, requesting assistance. We have a possible 211 in progress at the Bank of America. Bank of America. Located north of Kittredge. We have shots fired.
The robbery had barely begun, but the alert had already been given. Unaware of this, Larry and Emil carry on with their robbery.
This is a fucking holdup.
Then, putting their money where their mouths are, the two of them strafe the ceiling of the bank. The 30 or so employees and customers present at the Bank of America that morning are terrified. It doesn't take long for LAPD patrol cars to arrive at the scene of the crime. Inside the bank, Larry ensures that all the hostages remain motionless. 30 men, women, and children lie on the floor, terrified by the criminal who roams the room, threatening to kill anyone who dares challenge his authority. Meanwhile, Emil is busy collecting the money. He then hits a 79-year-old lady who doesn't obey quickly enough with a backhand to the head, then fires a dozen shots at the security door of the ticket office. The door blown open, Emil then heads into the private part of the bank, where the vault and other employees are located.
Get the money, or we will kill you.
Among the employees is the bank's deputy manager, who holds the keys to the vault. Seeing the robber's determination, he gives him access without resisting. This doesn't stop Emil from whacking him over the head with a rifle butt. Once inside the vault, Emil gets more and more upset. The deputy manager unlocks secure boxes containing only small bundles. The bandit's big black bag isn't filling up fast enough for his liking. They had planned on a haul of $750,000, and all they get back is barely half of that, just over $300,000. Emil stares angrily at his hostage and repeatedly asks him to take out more money. Alas, that's all the bank had at the time. An ominous silence falls. Suddenly, the disgruntled robber fires his assault rifle into the ceiling of the vault.
Everybody stay down. Rapid automatic fire. They're panning the area with fire.
For his part, Larry continued to watch the hostages, moving from one side of the bank lobby to another, when he noticed something strange outside. Not a single car was in sight. Larry goes out to investigate and scans the area. He sees a police car parked on his right, but no more concerned than that, he returns to the bank undisturbed.
Nobody look at me or I will kill you.
Larry then lashes out at the hostages and fires his AK-47. By this time, the police have surrounded the bank. Taking cover behind their vehicles, they're ready for the criminals. Or so they think. As it turns out, their handguns and short-range shotguns will be ineffective. Back in the bank, Emil and Larry are disappointed. The loot of $303,305 is clearly not enough. But the clock is ticking and the police are pouring in.
L40, be advised, I got 2 witnesses over here say there's possibly 2 or 3 suspects inside, possible AK-47s or wearing ski masks and dark clothing.
Confrontation seems inevitable. Future chaos is on the horizon, and it doesn't help that the cops haven't had enough time to clear the area of civilians. Yes, because many people are still walking around the area. For the robbers, it's time to plan their exit. Larry orders the security guard to take all the hostages to the vault. Then the 2 men head for the exit door, where the police are waiting. With their war weapons and multiple bulletproof protections, the upcoming confrontation is already shaping up to be a tense one. 9:24 a.m. Larry Phillips is the first to emerge from the building. He points his assault rifle at the police vehicles and opens fire.
Requested help at the bank.
Stay down. The suspects are shooting AK-47s.
All units at the Bank of America, stay down. Shots being fired. Automatic fire.
The deafening sound of the bullets echoed throughout the neighborhood. Police officers and civilians dived to the ground in order to avoid the piercing bullets from the automatic rifles. The cars they were hiding behind were pierced like paper, some bullets even flying out the other side of the bodywork. More than 200 rounds were fired by Larry. He then retreated into the bank. The first hail of bullets had already wounded several people, including 2 civilians. Then, at 9:30 a.m., Larry reappeared, this time accompanied by Emil, who is carrying the bag of money. The bursts of gunfire resume, but more intensely. John Caparelli, a police officer present that day, remembers,
A single fully automatic AK-47 makes a whole lot of noise, but when Matasariano joined his cohort in the lobby, the sound of 2 became the stuff of nightmares. It was the Devil's Symphony, and something that stayed with me even to this day.
The hail of bullets hit many police officers, including one who was shot in the thigh, shattering his femur. For the police officers present, it's almost impossible to fight back. The 2 robbers had far too superior weapons at their disposal. An observation shared by Constable Caparelli, who recalls,
We were in big trouble. Compared to their firepower, we had pea shooters, and the rounds were literally bouncing right off them. With our firepower not having much effect, the idea came to go to a nearby gun store.
Larry and Emil seemed invincible, yet 2 policemen managed to inflict the first damage, wounding Larry Phillips. Located some 200 meters from the robber, one of the policemen took a huge risk by going out into the open to shoot the robber in the back. He fired twice, wounding Larry in the back and buttock. The robber staggers, then turns around in rage, spraying the policeman with armor-piercing bullets that wound him and his partners. The situation is becoming more and more tense. Larry and Emil keep on firing at anything that moves, policemen or civilians. No one is spared.
The suspects are out and they're shooting at everything. How do they get out?
The robbers then want to secure their loot. To do so, Emil fires continuously to cover his sidekick, who heads for the car with a money bag containing 3 anti-theft devices. Suddenly, the system activates and explodes, covering all the wads of cash in red ink. Larry and Emil could kiss their 300 grand goodbye. The confrontation goes on, and surprisingly, the two bandits don't seem to want to run away. Indeed, they go so far as to attempt to break into an automatic teller machine outside the bank. Seemingly in no hurry, Larry strolls quietly past the bank, shooting anything that moves, including news helicopters broadcasting the shootout live on TV.
We've just been informed that the suspect is shooting at our helicopter and the other helicopters, so I'm going to try to keep a picture with you, but we are being shot at this time.
Clear, you get to the air. Let me go up higher.
For Emil Matasareanu, things are more complicated. Hit by several bullets, including one that tore off his eyebrow, he was in a state of shock and put himself out of action by sitting down in the passenger seat of the car.
The suspect is walking along the east side of the bank. He's just daring people to come after him. He's got additional weapons. The trunk is open on his vehicle. Good day out 10, and somebody has a shot. Take it. Suspect's head.
At this point, they could very well have taken their car and sped off, but no. Instead, they continue to confront the authorities. No doubt Larry, who had a tenacious hatred of cops, took great pleasure in shooting at the police. And since he was the leader of the duo, Emil probably followed him. At one point, however, we see Emil trying to convince his accomplice to leave. Passing to the driver's side, he opens the passenger door to signal to his accomplice that it's time to leave. But Larry doesn't seem to mind, and closes the door with a sweep of his hip, as if to say,
I still want to have some fun.
A scene which shows that his partner may have intended to put an end to the bloodshed. Because yes, it's possible that Emil heard on his radio scanner the arrival of SWAT, who are on their way to help the police.
50 out 10. We need someone here with some heavy guns. We need SWAT code 3.
And confronting SWAT was another matter. In an attempt to convince Larry of the necessity to leave, Emil stepped on the gas pedal and slowly drove the Chevrolet towards the north exit of the parking lot.
Suspects on the north side of the building. It's walking around like nothing. They got AK-47s, 2 of them. They're dressed in all black, heavy body armor.
Larry follows on foot and continues to shoot at the targets around him.
Intercept prospect vehicle. Do not stop it. They've got automatic weapons. There's nothing we have that can stop them.
After that, he takes cover behind a semi-trailer, while Emil, still driving the car, seems to be waiting for him to get away once and for all. Except that Larry is unwilling to answer his calls, busy repairing his gun, which has jammed in the meantime. That's when a police officer, positioned right in front of the trailer, sees Emil Matasareanu and starts shooting. The bullet passes through the driver's window and just a few centimeters from Matasareanu's face. Startled, Matasareanu hits the gas pedal and pulls hard on the steering wheel, practically lying down on the front seats to avoid the shots. Larry is now alone. Kneeling in the back of the truck, he still tries to unblock his gun, in vain. Officer Caparelli, stationed up the street from Larry, handgun in hand and exposed, fires at the assailant, then quickly escapes to avoid the Kalashnikov bursts. What he doesn't know is that Larry's gun is jammed, preventing the robber from firing back. Agent Caparelli continued to shoot at Larry, who began to flinch. A bullet hits him in the right clavicle artery, severing it and causing a severe wound. In response, Larry pulled out his Beretta pistol and counterattacked, when suddenly another policeman hit him on the right hand, causing him to drop his pistol. He picks it up from the ground, places the barrel under his chin, and pulls the trigger one last time. 9:56 a.m., the first assailant in the North Hollywood Shootout is dead. Meanwhile, Emil, whose car has both rear tires punctured and the windshield covered with bullet holes, tries to steal another vehicle to escape. For several minutes, he tries to steal every car he comes across, but the first 2 carjackings fail. In one of them, he is seen waving in the direction of Larry, who lies 3 blocks to the east, dead, surrounded by policemen. Emil taps his chest twice, as if to bid him a final farewell. Emil then attempts to steal a 3rd vehicle, and this is it. A beige Jeep arrives in the opposite direction and is blocked by the criminal's white Chevrolet, which shoots out the driver's windshield. The driver of the pickup, hit by shrapnel in the arm and face, doesn't try to understand. He flees immediately.
Citizen's vehicle. It looks like a brown truck. He's 15 on the westbound right now on Archwood.
Emil now has a way out. He transfers his weapons and ammunition to the pickup, then tries to start the car. Problem, it wouldn't start. The driver had activated the kill switch, rendering the Jeep unusable. Then a police patrol car with 3 SWAT team members on board arrives at full speed and pulls up in front of the pickup where Emil is sitting, still trying to start the car. Seeing the police arrive, Emil immediately leaves the stolen vehicle and positions himself in the back of his Chevrolet, ready to face the SWAT team less than 10 meters away. For the first time, the confrontation is one of equal firepower, with the officers armed with assault rifles. Escape seems compromised for the fugitive, but that doesn't stop him from continuing the fight. Cornered behind his car, however, he is quickly overtaken by the bursts of SWAT bullets flying everywhere. Emil tries to fire back blindly, but most of the bullets land in his own windshield and on the open trunk of the car. The police continue to fire at Emil, who is shot several times in the chest. But Emil is still alive. Seeing the assailant still crouching and in firing position, the SWAT agents then had the good idea to aim at his unprotected legs. The shots fly off and hit Emil several times. With his legs riddled with bullets, Emil no longer had the strength to continue. He was hit 29 times and lost a lot of blood. The SWAT officers put him on his stomach and handcuffed him. Emil, smiling, then still has the strength to utter a few obscenities and even taunts them, saying,
"Shoot me in the fucking head."
He bled to death on the pavement before the ambulance could arrive. The North Hollywood Shootout was finally over. "44 minutes of terror. That's what the police and local residents lived through that morning. More than 1,700 shots were exchanged during the North Hollywood Shootout, 1,100 of them on the robber side alone. That's 1 shot every 2 seconds. A botched robbery that left 2 dead, Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasareanu. A real miracle considering the violence of the event, which also injured 8 civilians and 12 police officers, 2 of them seriously, forcing them to end their careers. In addition, 12 police cars were destroyed and 85 civilian vehicles were hit. The hundreds of bullet holes in the walls reflected the horror of what had happened that morning. Now it was time for the cleanup. Finally, the North Hollywood Shootout highlighted the glaring imbalance in firearms between police and criminals. The police's shotguns and handguns were clearly no match for the criminals' assault rifles and bulletproof protection. This was done after the North Hollywood Shootout, when the LAPD, followed by police departments across the U.S., were issued semi-automatic rifles to prevent further incidents of this type. Police would later discover that Larry Phillips had a copy of the film Heat in his home, a film that the 2 men probably used as inspiration for their robberies. Firearms were also seized during the raids on Larry and Emil's homes, but most of the stolen money, around $1.5 million from previous robberies, was never recovered. A story that ends in mystery. That's the end of this incredible story. Thank you for following it to the end. If you liked it, you can of course like and share it, as you'll be rewarding my work in this way. And don't hesitate to subscribe, as more videos will follow soon. Thank you for your time, and take care.